Japanese people had long been known for their dedication to work. The term karoshi had been coined in the 1970s in Japan to describe deaths caused by exhaustion from overworking. However, this problem is multifaceted and cannot be attributed to one aspect of the toxic Japanese work culture. Managers pressure employees into doing tasks outside of their responsibilities, and employees are encouraged to arrive earlier than their schedule, while leaving work on time is stigmatized. Whenever there are tight deadlines, sleeping at their workplace is quite a common practice for Japanese people. Despite the negative impacts on society and the collective mental health of the Japanese workforce, this morbid tradition is continually practiced to this day, causing some people to fall so far off the rails that they commit suicide. In 1999, the combination of negligence, corporate greed, and complete disregard for worker safety will have caused the unimaginable suffering of one man. On the morning of September 30th, 1999, nuclear power plant technicians Hisashi Ouchi, his colleague Masato Shinohara, and their supervisor, Yutaka Yukokawa, go through their usual route. They arrive at the Takemura nuclear power plant for another day of work. At this point in Japanese history, reliance on nuclear energy was growing. Japan realized its lack of natural resources, so it depended approximately 80% of its energy on imports. Remarkably, almost 90% of crude oil was supplied by the Middle East to them. However, due to the oil crisis of the 1970s, the government of Japan decided to branch out into different forms of energy to sustain a growing economy that's smack dab in the middle of industrialization. Hence, the crucial demand for nuclear energy. The Takemura nuclear power plant was the first nuclear power plant established in Japan. One of its facilities was for repurposing uranium hexafluoride into uranium dioxide. Eventually, the uranium will be further processed into fuel rods that other nuclear plants and nuclear reactors will use. This particular facility was owned by the Japan Nuclear Fuel Conservation Company, JCO. Ouchi, Shinohara, and Yokokawa proceeded with their usual morning routine. One of the responsibilities of a nuclear plant technician like Hisashi is to oversee the mixing of uranium. The reprocessing of uranium has three crucial steps. Firstly, the dissolution tank. A mixture of uranium powder at the maximum concentration of 5% and nitric acid is mixed here. Secondly, the buffer tank. This tank is shaped cylindrically to help prevent the uranium from reaching accidental criticality, an accidental nuclear fission chain reaction. This tank also helps control the drip of uranium into the third and last step, the precipitation tank, which is surrounded by a water cooling jacket to help remove excess heat from the reaction. Here, the final mixing of the uranium is done carefully. 3 years prior to that fateful day in September, JCO's officials decided to experiment by skipping a few steps to hasten the production of this highly dangerous material due to demand and pressure. In response to this demand, JCO wrote in their official procedure that the uranium powder can be mixed in the stainless steel bucket by hand. Albeit illegal, no incidents have occurred since the approval of the procedure, so it wasn't taken seriously. Additionally, to make matters worse, JCO was behind schedule with the production of fuel rods at the time. Pressured by JCO, the technicians decided to go even further with the already hastened process. This is where things started to go downhill. At approximately 10:35 a.m., Ouchi and Shinohara mixed the uranium powder in stainless steel buckets, but instead used 7 times more than the allowed concentration limit. Ouchi draped his body inside the precipitation tank and assisted Shinohara, who stood on a platform to pour the mixture. Suddenly, the gamma radiation alarms sounded. Ouchi, Shinohara, and Yokokawa knew they had made a terrible mistake. A flash of blue light was reportedly seen by the three. This is called Cherenkov radiation. where blue light is emitted when the electrons are moving faster than the speed of light on a specific medium. Massive amounts of energy are released and a shockwave, similar to a sonic boom from supersonic planes, is generated. This confirms that an uncontrolled nuclear chain fission reaction happened and was buffering the room with lethal doses of gamma particles. Ouchi, who was closest to the blast, received the highest dose, while Shinohara, who stood on the platform, received the second highest dose. Yokokawa, who was 4 meters away from the tank and was behind the computer, received the lowest dose. The regulatory dose limit for people who are occupationally exposed is 20 to 50 millisieverts, MSV per year. The 3-man crew received a combination of more than 30,000 millisieverts in less than a few minutes. Ouchi received a whopping dose of 17,000 millisieverts, while Shinohara and Yokokawa received 10,000 and 3,000 millisieverts, respectively. The 3 men fled immediately. However, none of them were able to get very far. Ouchi and Shinohara immediately felt searing pain all over their bodies, as they quickly became nauseous and short of breath. Yokokawa also felt the effects, albeit slightly less extreme. Ouchi enters the locker room where he vomits and passes out on the floor. The plant was immediately cleared out to control the damage and prevent the other workers from getting exposed. Ouchi, Shinohara, and Yokokawa were taken to the National Institute of Radiological Sciences in Chiba. However, because of the severity of Ouchi's case, he was quickly sent to the University of Tokyo Hospital, where there are more qualified staff and modern equipment to handle the treatment and process. On the evening of September 30th, Ouchi arrived at the University of Tokyo Hospital and was received by the medical staff. Strangely, Ouchi seemed fine and went through the usual protocols like any other patient in the hospital. He was brought up on a stretcher and taken to a private room in the ICU. One of the nurses attended to him there. She noted that aside from a swollen arm and seemingly only sunburnt skin, Ouchi seemed fine and was in high spirits. Another nurse commented that he actually might be able to go home later. Unbeknownst to them, this was the beginning of one of the most horrific deaths in history. After learning that Ouchi was in a nuclear plant accident, the medical staff conducted a micrograph of his bone marrow to really hone in on the problem. What they learned from the results filled them with dread, and the doctors knew then that Ouchi's case was no simple workplace-related incident. The human body has countless cells that die, but are shed and replaced throughout time. This is facilitated by the chromosomes in our body, which contains the blueprint for the repairing process. Without the chromosomes' functionality, a person simply cannot survive. Ouchi's chromosomes were so badly damaged from the radiation blast that samples of it looked like a mesh of soup. Some of it broke into pieces like glass, scattering into various directions, and could hardly be identified. Some were fused together abnormally. The blueprint for cell replication and repair simply wasn't there anymore, and the chromosomes were rendered useless. The doctors could not believe what they were seeing. If the damage is apparently that severe, why is it that according to the nurses, Ouchi seemed fine and in high spirits even? The doctors agreed that Ouchi was in the walking ghost phase, which is a period of health that may last for hours or days, depending on the body's reaction to radiation poisoning. Before the radiation blast, Ouchi's cells were still functional, so whatever health he apparently showed upon his arrival at the hospital will be short-lived once the radiation poisoning becomes an effect. Simply put, he was a ticking time bomb, and Ouchi's nightmarish suffering was about to begin. Beside losing the functionality of his chromosomes, Ouchi's white blood cell count stooped dangerously low, making him susceptible to infections. To remedy this, the chief physician handling Ouchi's case, Dr. Kazuhiko Miyakawa, ordered him to be moved into a sterile room where he can be constantly shielded from outside pathogens and bacteria. With the possibility of infections out of the way, Dr. Miyakawa recognized that to give Ouchi a fighting chance at survival, they needed to supply his body with an influx of healthy chromosomes so that it can be coaxed to replicate cells and repair itself again. Dr. Miyakawa decided to try an experimental treatment for cancer called hematopoietic stem cell transplant. This treatment will require the harvesting of healthy bone marrow cells from a donor, which will then be transplanted into Ouchi. The healthy cells will make their way into Ouchi's bone marrow and ideally should allow it to produce healthy cells of its own again. The only caveat to this highly advanced treatment at the time is that the donor must be a good match for Ouchi's immune system. Fortunately, Ouchi's sister was deemed a good match by the doctors, and so the procedure was undertaken. Although helpful, Ouchi's family was anxious that Ouchi was the first recipient of this treatment in the world. Knowing full well the damage done by the radiation to Ouchi's body, Dr. Miyakawa made sure that the family was able to see Ouchi on a daily basis. He realized that any false hopes would make the already difficult situation more problematic. Dr. Miyakawa was not idealistic about the situation and wanted Ouchi's family to accept the worst-case scenario as early as now. Meanwhile, Ouchi did not seem to understand the gravity of his situation. One nurse noted that Ouchi stated, "I thought I'd be able to leave the hospital in a month or so, but it's going to take longer, isn't it?" Later, he asked about his exposure to radiation. When you're exposed to radiation like this, is there a risk of contracting leukemia or something? Unbeknownst to him, Ouchi didn't have the luxury of time to contract leukemia. Physical symptoms of the radiation poisoning began to creep up on Ouchi's body, losing its elasticity. Ouchi's skin began to fall off. The medical staff noticed that removing medical tape would peel off big chunks of skin from Ouchi's body. This prompted the doctors to stop the use of medical tape or any tape of adhesive on Ouchi. Later, Ouchi's lungs started to fill up with fluid, so he begins to struggle with breathing. At this point, Ouchi didn't have the energy to speak or move too much. However, Ouchi's spirit seemed unbreakable. He still managed to smile and say "I love you" to his wife, which the nurses found to be heartbreaking. Soon, as the fluids continually build up in his lungs, Ouchi lost the ability to breathe. The doctors decided to put him in assisted breathing. The family visited Ouchi every day, and they put paper cranes beside him. 10 days after the stem cell transplantation, the doctors conducted a test on Ouchi to see the effects of the treatment. Ouchi's family waited nervously as they waited for the results. Miraculously, the cells harvested from Ouchi's sister were present in Ouchi's body, indicating that the treatment, although first in the world, had worked. Over the next few days, Ouchi's white blood cell count also increased to normal levels. Ouchi's family and the doctors were ecstatic. Hisashi Ouchi might be able to go home after all. One week after the positive news, Ouchi's condition began to deteriorate again. This is where things really started to take a turn for the worse. An endoscopy was done on Ouchi, and a horrifying truth was revealed. The membrane of Ouchi's intestines had died and was peeling from its walls. A human body's intestine is lined with the intestinal mucosa. The surface is highly important for absorption, digestion, and even protection against microbial infections. Without this, a person will neither be able to hold on to the nutrients from the food they eat, nor be able to absorb water. Eventually, this loss of fluids and nutrients may lead to dehydration or starvation, and ultimately, death. However, death was far preferable to what Ouchi had to suffer through in the next few days. To figure out what went wrong, Dr. Miyakawa performed another test on Ouchi. He learned that the healthy chromosomes transplanted to Ouchi had now become corrupted due to the surrounding radiation in his body. Despite the medical team's efforts, Ouchi's body was simply too damaged from the radiation blast that it affected even the healthy transplanted cells. This means that Ouchi is back to square one. Dr. Miyakawa was frustrated. He knew he had to break the devastating news to Ouchi's hopeful family. Meanwhile, Ouchi started to experience gastrointestinal problems. He was losing control of his bowels and produced 3 liters of diarrhea per day. Also, the peeling intestinal membrane caused him to bleed internally. Ouchi was quickly losing a lot of blood, which prompted Dr. Miyakawa to perform blood transfusions on him. Due to the severity of the hemorrhage, Ouchi was given as many as 10 blood transfusions over the course of a day. Under these circumstances, Ouchi was constantly administered fentanyl to help ease his pain. Later, Ouchi's skin and flesh continued to blister and peel off. As a result, his body could no longer hold fluids and he was in danger of becoming completely dehydrated. Ouchi reportedly lost 10 liters of fluids a day, which had to be replaced through an IV stream. To remedy this, the doctors completely wrapped Ouchi in bandages in the hopes of retaining the fluids. However, it became futile, as Ouchi's skin and flesh bled and seeped continuously. The loss of fluids was so severe that the doctors had to measure them so that they would know how much to pump back into Ouchi. According to one nurse, it took almost half a day to replace the bandages in a heated room as Ouchi's body lost its ability to regulate heat. In a last-ditch effort to preserve fluids from Ouchi's body, Dr. Miyakawa decided to give Ouchi large skin grafts in the hopes that it would buy the medical team time to figure out more ways to help the poor man. However, even the skin grafts did not adhere to Ouchi's dehydrated body. This was the beginning of the end for Ouchi. At that point, Ouchi was becoming hopeless. A nurse recorded him saying, "No more. I'm going home. Please stop." In his state of deliriousness, Ouchi was reportedly calling out to his mother. Because of his skin losing its elasticity, Ouchi's eyelids could not close anymore, and he was reportedly seen to be crying blood. Despite everything, Ouchi's family was still hopeful that one day they'd see him well again. Soon, the symptoms became too much for Ouchi, and he was put into a medically induced coma. An ominous air loomed over Dr. Miyakawa's team. Everyone knew that Ouchi was at the end of his rope. However, as medical professionals, they did not speak it loudly, as it would deter them from their objective: to help Hisashi Ouchi. Two months after the accident, Hisashi Ouchi had undergone unimaginable pain. He had been transplanted stem cells from his sister and had been administered with blood transfusion and skin grafts, but all of it ultimately failed. Ouchi's time was running out. Due to the cumulative stress on Ouchi's body, his heart was pumping twice as hard at the rate of 120 beats per minute. Despite Ouchi's immobile state, his heart rate was that of a person who was running a marathon. One day, Ouchi's heart stopped. Due to the lack of a do-not-resuscitate document, Ouchi was revived. At this point, Ouchi's brain, although producing waves, was nearly gone, as he didn't respond to any stimulus anymore. Additionally, his kidneys and liver stopped functioning completely. Ouchi's life was hanging by a thread, and he was entirely dependent on machines that were keeping him alive. Finally, after discussing among themselves, the family decided to sign the do-not-resuscitate on Dr. Miyakawa's behest. Finally, on December 21st, 83 days after a grueling battle for life, Hisashi Ouchi's heart stopped and he was finally released from his suffering. A family man and a dedicated worker, Hisashi Ouchi died from multiple organ failure. Besides Hisashi Ouchi, the other technician, Shinohara, who received the second highest dose of radiation among the three, also died. Their supervisor, Yutaka Yakokawa, who received the lowest dose of radiation, survived the ordeal. News of the incident flooded the Japanese media. 49 people were exposed to the radiation blast. However, only Ouchi and Shinohara were the fatalities. After a year-long investigation, the police arrested 6 officials from JCO due to their involvement in the criticality incident. Yutaka Yakokawa, the supervisor among the 3, was one of them. They were charged with professional negligence. JCO's reputation was on the line as the media reported their deliberate sidestepping of safety measures and procedures to achieve the growing demand for nuclear fuel rods. Eventually, they were stripped of their business license and, together with its parent company, paid 12.66 billion yen in compensation to the residents and local businesses affected by the incident. In this critical time of nuclear energy growth, Takaimura's power plant employed a third of the town's population. However, in response to the infamous incident, Takaimura elected an anti-nuclear representative in its assembly. Despite everything that happened, the Japanese government was still insistent on relying on nuclear energy in the future. Kazuhiko Miyakawa, the chief physician who treated Ouchi, reflected on the 83-day ordeal. He said to Kyoto News, It was the first time I experienced such a case in my 30-plus years as a doctor. Miyakawa thanked the family's support for his medical team. Despite the dire situation, according to Miyakawa, he saw how much the family wanted Ouchi to live and be well again. He reflects on the many things he learned from the incident. There is no question about it. Hisashi Ouchi and Masato Shinohara's deaths were tragic and could have been prevented. However, some people argue that Ouchi's ordeal should not have been extended unnecessarily. Claims emerged that the doctors wanted to study the effects of radiation on the human body, and in order to do that, they tried their hardest to keep Ouchi alive longer than necessary. Some claim that it wasn't the medical professionals that needed to be blamed, but Ouchi's own family. They said that the family's insistence on reviving Ouchi, despite the hopeless situation, led to his unimaginable and prolonged suffering. Others put the entire blame on JCO's management, who neglected the workers' safety in the first place. In the end, I guess we'll never really know what happened. We can only conclude that Ouchi's suffering was the combination of multiple horrible things coming together. This is a very disturbing story, but to everyone who's still here, thank you very much for staying with me. Although it might be a terrible way to learn about a man's suffering, I think it's important to know about Ouchi's existence and his ordeal. The more people learn about the incident, hopefully, the less it happens in the future. Now, if you enjoyed the video, please let me know by hitting the thumbs up button, commenting on your thoughts below, subscribing to our channel, and hitting that notification bell for more videos like these. See you on the next one.